The Zartek fleet, a looming darkness on the horizon, arrived like a storm. Their massive warships hung in space like predatory birds, casting an oppressive shadow over the remnants of humanity's defenses. Captain Elira Hayes stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her eyes fixed on the view screen, calculating every move with cold precision. The Resolute was humanity's last hope, but even she knew that the odds were insurmountable. "Captain, incoming transmission," the voice of Commander Liam Holt crackled from across the room. On screen, Hayes responded, her tone unwavering. The screen flickered, and an image of the Zartek ambassador, a sleek and alien figure, filled the view. His cold, reptilian eyes regarded them with contempt. "Humanity," the ambassador's voice was a hiss, "this is your final warning. Surrender, or we shall wipe your race from the galaxy. Your defiance will only prolong your extinction." A chill ran down the spines of every officer on the bridge. Earth had already endured months of brutal attacks, and most of the outer colonies have fallen. Humanity's defenses were reduced to a fraction of their former strength, but Captain Hayes stood firm, her gaze locked on the ambassador. "We will never surrender," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "You will have to kill us all." The ambassador's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "As you wish." The transmission cut off, and the tension on the bridge was palpable. Everyone knew this could be their final battle. Yet, for all the overwhelming force the Zartek possessed, they had underestimated humanity's defiance. Hayes had spent years training her crew, honing their skills, and preparing for this very moment. "All hands to battle stations," Hayes ordered. "We fight until we cannot fight anymore. All fleet assets, deploy now. We make our stand here." The Resolute shuddered as the battle alarms blared. Outside, the vast fleet of the Zartek descended like a tidal wave. They were relentless, massive ships bristling with weapons, their shields shimmering with otherworldly energy. The human fleet was small, barely a fraction of the Zartek's forces, but Hayes wasn't about to let her people go down without a fight. "Helm, bring us into attack range," she commanded, her voice steady. "Weapons, prepare for full engagement. Target their command ships." "Yes, Captain," replied Ensign Marlowe, her hand moving quickly across the console. The Resolute's engines roared to life as the warship maneuvered into position. The first blast of energy from the Zartek ships hit the Resolute, and the ship rocked violently. The crew gritted their teeth as the bridge was momentarily plunged into darkness, only to be replaced by the red emergency lights. "Shields holding at 30%, reported Lieutenant Kale, the tactical officer, his face tense. "Incoming fire from their flagship. Direct hit on port side." "We need to move faster," Hayes barked. "We need to cripple their command ship before they can get their secondary fleets into position." The Resolute shot forward, narrowly avoiding another barrage from the alien fleet. Human ships, small and agile, darted around the Zartek vessels, launching a flurry of missiles and energy blasts in retaliation. The Zartek retaliated with ruthless precision, but humanity's fleet was quick and adaptive. They fought like wolves, each human ship outmaneuvering the larger Zartek vessels with hit-and-run tactics, striking fast before retreating into the darkness of space. Hayes' hands gripped the armrests of her chair as she watched her crew execute the plan flawlessly. Each strike was calculated, each movement designed to buy time and cause maximum damage. But time was running out. The Zartek flagship, their central command ship, remained intact, its shields barely dented. The humans' weapons, though powerful, were not enough to pierce its defenses. "Captain, their flagship is charging its main cannon. Cale's voice rang out urgently. All power to forward shields, Hayes commanded, our eyes narrowing. Divert everything we have left into the weapons. We need to take that flagship down, or we're all dead. The Resolute surged forward again, all weapons firing. Each shot from the human fleet collided with the alien ship's shields, creating blinding flashes of light. Then, just as the Zartek flagship began to fire its devastating energy cannon, the Resolute's pulse cannons locked onto a vulnerable spot, the flagship's engine nacelles. The first shot struck true, and the flagship staggered. The Zartek's main cannon fired, but it veered off course, missing the Resolute by inches. Humanity's defiance had disrupted the alien forces for just long enough. But the Resolute wasn't out of danger yet. They had only scratched the surface of the battle. The Zartek would come at them with everything they had, and this was only the beginning. Stay focused, Hayes shouted. The war is far from over. As the crew prepared for the next wave of Zartek forces, Captain Hayes knew the battle was about to intensify beyond anything they had ever faced. But she also knew one thing for certain: humanity's spirit would never break, not while there was breath in their bodies. This fight would be their legacy. The battle outside the Resolute's hull was chaos. Zartek ships, massive and menacing, were everywhere, their engines burning bright as they circled the remnants of the human fleet. The Resolute had taken its first blows, but now, with the enemy on the offensive, the stakes were higher than ever. Shields at 15%. Lieutenant Cale shouted from the tactical station. They're focusing fire on our engines, Captain. If we don't pull out, we'll be sitting ducks. Keep firing. Hayes snapped, her voice cutting through the noise. We need to buy time for the other ships to regroup. Her crew worked like a well-oiled machine, each member executing their duties with a calm that belied the imminent danger. Yet, Hayes could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for humanity's future. Every decision, every move, would determine if they lived to see another day. Captain, shouted Ensign Marlowe, the helmsman, the fleet is breaking formation. Some ships are retreating. Damn it, Hayes cursed under her breath. Panic was spreading. The Resolute's sensors picked up a dozen human ships veering off course, trying to escape the incoming alien onslaught. Their retreat would leave the Resolute exposed, but even worse, it could cause the entire human line to collapse. Hayes knew she had to act fast. Bring us alongside the fleet. We're not abandoning anyone, she ordered, her voice steady but urgent. The Resolute lurched forward, its thrusters flaring as it cut across the battlefield, weaving through fire as Zartek weapons pounded the shields. The human ships, though smaller and less powerful, were agile and desperate, launching volleys of missiles and energy beams to cover their retreating comrades. But as the flagship of the Zartek fleet zeroed in on the Resolute, Hayes knew time was running out. Target their flagship's weapons grid, Hayes barked. We need to take out that cannon. A ripple of uncertainty passed over the bridge. The Zartek flagship was far stronger than anything humanity had. It had shields that could absorb nearly any hit, and its main weapon, once charged, could obliterate the human fleet in a single blast. But Hayes wasn't going to back down. We're going in, she commanded, her eyes locked on the tactical display. All forward thrust. Take us into their flank. We'll hit them where they're weakest. Her officers didn't hesitate. The Resolute angled sharply, its hull groaning as it strained against the immense gravitational pull of nearby Zartek warships. Every inch of the ship's systems was pushed to its limits as the crew fired everything they had in rapid succession. Blasts from their pulse cannons and torpedoes slammed into the side of the flagship's hull, sparking fiery explosions that lit up the dark void. For a moment, it seemed like they might be succeeding. The Zartek flagship staggered, its powerful main cannon wavering in its aim. The Resolute cut across the line of fire, avoiding a deadly blast by mere inches. But just as hope seemed to rise, the flagship unleashed its retaliatory strike. A brilliant beam of energy shot out, brighter than 1,000 suns, and the Resolute was caught in its path. The bridge lights flickered, and a tremor passed through the ship as the massive energy wave hit their shields. Shields at 5%. Cale yelled, his voice strained. "We can't take another hit like that." Hayes gritted her teeth. The Resolute was still in the fight, but for how long? She knew that without the flagship's destruction, the rest of the fleet would be slaughtered. "We need to take out their engines," Hayes muttered under her breath. It was their only chance. She turned to Marlowe. "Get us as close to the flagship as possible. We're going to board them." The helmsman's face went pale. "Captain, are you?" "I'm not asking for your opinion, Ensign. Do it." Marlowe's hands flew across the controls, steering the Resolute toward the massive Zartek flagship, now within striking distance. As the distance closed, the Resolute ducked and weaved through the incoming fire, the ship shaking violently with each hit. On the tactical screen, Hayes saw a glimmer of opportunity. A vulnerable section of the flagship's outer hull appeared, barely a weakness, but enough for them to exploit. Her hand slammed down on the comm button. "All teams prepare for boarding," Hayes shouted. "We're going in." The air on the bridge crackled with tension as the crew prepared for the dangerous maneuver. There was no turning back now. The fate of humanity hinged on what happened next. As the Resolute drew close, Hayes took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Boarding a Zartek warship was suicide for most. Their technology was light years ahead, their soldiers brutal beyond measure. But Hayes had one advantage. Humanity had never been afraid to die for their future. "Get ready, everyone. This is our last shot." The airlock doors opened with a hiss, and in the cold silence of space, the human boarding teams readied themselves for what could be the final chapter of humanity's fight for survival. The Resolute's engines flared as it surged toward the Zartek flagship. The entire crew braced for impact, knowing that the boarding operation was their only hope to cripple the enemy's command structure and turn the tide of battle. But as they closed in on their target, something shifted in the air, something far darker than the impending assault. "Captain, we've lost contact with Team Alpha," Lieutenant Cale called out, his voice tense. They were the first to board the flagship, but their comms are silent. No response. Hayes' heart sank, but she quickly masked her concern with a steely resolve. "Keep trying to establish a link. Team Bravo is next. They must have made it onto the ship." The Resolute's outer hull vibrated as it closed in on the alien flagship. A massive Zartek battleship hung ominously in front of them, its black surface scarred from the human bombardment. The moment was perilous. Boarding a Zartek vessel wasn't just a tactical strike, it was a suicide mission. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and up against a force unlike any they had ever encountered. "Deploying boarding pods." Marlowe called out from the helm. The pod launchers hissed as the first round of human soldiers was propelled toward the enemy warship. The sleek, armored pods shot through the blackness of space like missiles, trailing red streaks in their wake. For a brief moment, the bridge fell silent. Hayes gripped the armrests of her command chair, her eyes narrowing as she watched the battle unfold on the view screen. The other human ships continued their assault on the Zartek, but their movements were slowing. The loss of Team Alpha could be a death blow if they didn't succeed. Captain. Kel's voice broke through the tension. Team Bravo's pod has just breached the flagship. However, there's something strange. They're not broadcasting any battle reports. Damn it, Hayes muttered under her breath. Stay on it. I need eyes on the inside. What's going on with Team Alpha? Just as she spoke, the screen flickered and a dark figure appeared. The unmistakable face of Lieutenant Commander Jace Maller, a highly respected officer who had led Team Alpha, appeared on the communication panel. Captain. Maller's voice was tight, cold. We have a problem. Maller, what's happening? Where are the rest of your team? Hayes demanded, fighting to keep her voice even. There was a long pause before Maller spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. It's a trap. The Jartek knew we were coming. We've been infiltrated. A cold shiver ran down Hayes' spine as she processed his words. What do you mean, infiltrated? Maller hesitated, then his face grew darker. I'm sorry, Captain. One of our own, is working for the Jartek. Hayes' blood ran cold. A traitor, in the middle of the most critical mission humanity had ever undertaken. The very thought nearly crippled her. The consequences of betrayal now meant the difference between survival and extinction. Who is it? Hayes demanded, her voice a low growl. I don't know yet, Maller replied, his voice strained. But I've seen them communicate with the Jartek, without our knowledge. We were ambushed the moment we boarded. I've sent the signal to abort the mission, but the Jartek are moving in on us. The transmission crackled with static, and then Maller's face disappeared, replaced by the chaos of explosions and blinding lights as Jartek forces overwhelmed his team. The connection was lost. For a moment, Hayes was silent, her mind racing. They had just lost Team Alpha, and now Team Bravo was on the verge of being wiped out as well. Whoever the traitor was, they had just doomed humanity's last hope. We need to act now, Hayes said, her voice sharp and commanding, despite the rising panic in her chest. Marlowe, bring us closer to the flagship. Get us to that airlock now. Captain, Kale started, but she cut him off. I don't care who is on that ship, Kale, she said firmly. If there's a traitor, they will answer for it. We'll deal with it after we take the flagship down. But for now, we're not leaving anyone behind. The crew moved quickly, but the reality was sinking in. The odds had just worsened. The traitor had sabotaged their best chance, and with the Jartek reinforcing their flagship, the mission was spiraling out of control. Yet Hayes wouldn't back down. Not now. Not when humanity was teetering on the edge of annihilation. Listen up, Hayes stood, her voice cutting through the tense air. We've lost the element of surprise, but we're not out of this yet. We get them hard, we get them fast, and we don't stop until the Jartek are on the ropes. The crew nodded in unison, despite the grim realization of their situation. They had to fight, not just for victory, but for survival. As the Resolute drew closer to the alien flagship, Hayes prepared herself for the battle ahead. The traitor among them would be dealt with, but first they had to survive the storm. And humanity's fight for the future was far from over. The Resolute shuddered violently as it drew closer to the Jartek flagship. Hayes stood at the front of the bridge, her gaze locked on the massive dark structure before her. Every passing second seemed to stretch into eternity. The crew was bracing for impact, preparing for a fight that would determine their future. Captain, we're within range of the flagship's outer hull, Marlowe called out, his hands working feverishly on the controls. preparing for boarding launch. Good. We're taking the fight to them, Hayes responded, her voice steady, despite the urgency in the air. The Zartek flagship loomed larger, its jagged contours bathed in the eerie glow of distant stars. Every inch of it screamed of alien technology, a weapon designed for domination. It was a ship unlike any human-built vessel, bristling with advanced weapons and reinforced by shields so strong that human firepower would struggle to even scratch it. "We need to make sure we hit the command center," Hayes said, pacing across the bridge. "Our priority is disabling their communications and leadership. Without that, the rest of their fleet will simply follow their orders without question." "Understood, Captain," Cale replied, tapping away at the console. Team Bravo's pod has reached the outer hull. They're starting to breach. "Prepare to launch the next wave." "We're not giving them time to recover," Hayes ordered, her eyes narrowing. The boarders would need every advantage they could get. If the Zartek had set a trap, they'd be walking straight into it. Suddenly, the bridge lights flickered and then dimmed. A momentary flash of red bathed the room. "What's happening?" Hayes demanded, her instincts going on high alert. "Internal systems are under attack," Cale responded quickly. "Unauthorized access. Someone's overridden the security protocols. The outer boarding pods, they are being rerouted." A cold dread settled over Hayes. The traitor. They had compromised the mission from the inside. The ship's internal security system was now sabotaged, and there was no telling what else had been tampered with. "Patch into the system," Hayes barked. "Find the breach. Now." Kel's fingers flew across the console, trying to regain control of the compromised systems. "Whoever it is, they're good. It's not a simple hack. It's embedded deep in the Resolute's code. I can't isolate the intruder fast enough." "Forget the systems," Hayes snapped, her voice razor-sharp. "We need to secure the airlocks. Move the remaining teams into position and prepare for manual boarding. We can't let them take full control of the ship." The bridge crew scrambled into action, but Hayes knew the situation was spiraling. If the traitor had control of the boarding pods, they could turn the tide in favor of the Zartek. Human lives would be sacrificed in vain. She needed answers. Now. "Cale, do you have eyes on the internal security feed?" Hayes demanded. "Working on it. But whoever did this is covering their tracks. I'm seeing glitches in the footage, Captain. If it's one of our own, they know how to hide." Her chest tightened. She had trusted every person on this ship. They were family, and now one of them had betrayed her, betrayed humanity. Suddenly, the comms system buzzed to life, and an image of Lieutenant Commander Mallory appeared on the screen, his face gaunt, streaked with sweat, and his uniform torn. His eyes, once filled with unwavering loyalty, were now clouded with fear. "Captain," Mallory rasped, his voice strained. "You need to listen to me. The traitor, it's me." A wave of shock and disbelief washed over Hayes and her crew. The bridge was silent, save for the crackling of the comms. "What are you talking about, Mallory?" Hayes asked, her voice low and controlled, though her mind was racing. "You're the one who warned us. You said we were walking into a trap." "I was wrong, Captain," Mallory replied, his voice trembling. I've been compromised. They've got control of me, of my mind. I didn't want this. But they've been planting thoughts, manipulating my every move. I didn't even know what I was doing until it was too late." Hayes' hand gripped the edge of the command console. The weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. The traitor was one of her own, but Mallory, her trusted officer, was not entirely to blame. His mind had been broken, twisted by the Zartek. Malor, Hayes said, her voice calm despite the maelstrom of emotions swirling inside her. Where are you? What are they making you do? Don't come to me, Captain, Malor warned, his voice growing frantic. I'm not the only one they've turned. There's another officer. They're working together, and if you don't stop them now, they'll have full control. The Galactic are already moving into position, and I can't stop them. I'll handle it, Hayes said, her voice low and steady. You hold on, Malor. Help is coming. The comm went dead. Captain Hayes turned toward Kale, her jaw clenched. Get the security feeds back online. I want a full scan of the ship. We find the second traitor. Now. On it, Captain, Kale responded, his fingers flying across his console. Hayes took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of thoughts in her mind. The traitor had been hidden in plain sight. The Galactic's manipulation went deeper than they had ever imagined. But now, with Malor's confession, Hayes knew that humanity's fight for survival had just become much more complex. She turned to the rest of her crew, her voice strong. Prepare yourselves. We're going to take the fight to them, and we're not leaving anyone behind. Humanity's future depends on us. The war was far from over, and now the battle for trust and loyalty was about to begin. The tension in the air was palpable as Hayes stared at the empty space where Malor's image had flickered away. The room felt smaller now, constricted by the weight of betrayal, the grim realization that the war for humanity's future was not just a battle against alien invaders, but a war against the insidious infection of corruption within her own ranks. Kale, are we able to regain control of the pods? Hayes demanded, her voice a razor's edge of urgency. She needed to act quickly before the traitors could cause more damage. I'm doing what I can, Captain, Kale replied, his face tight with concentration. But the systems are so deeply compromised, it's like they've installed backdoors everywhere. I'm having to manually bypass layers of encryption. We don't have time for this, Lieutenant, Hayes barked, her hands clenched into fists. We're already at the Galactic flagship, and the longer we stay here, the more our people will die. Get it under control, or I'll have you thrown into the brig. Cal's eyes flickered toward Hayes, then back to the screen. His fingers flew over the panel as he muttered to himself. The urgency was real, and his face showed the strain of it. But Hayes knew he was good, damn good, and there was no one she trusted more in this moment. I'm pulling up all internal feeds, Kale said, his voice gritting with the effort. We've got visual feeds from every deck, Captain. I'm running a deep scan for any unauthorized movements. Do it, Hayes said, before turning to her crew. We need a full lockdown on all airlocks and communications. I don't want anyone getting out without our knowledge. The crew scrambled to execute the orders, their motions swift and precise despite the chaos of their situation. The bridge hummed with activity, but Hayes remained focused on the bigger picture. They had a traitor, or more, on board. Someone had been feeding information to the Galactic, working from the inside to cripple their defenses. The seconds stretched into long minutes, and the weight of her responsibility pressed down on her. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death for the men and women aboard this ship. Hayes closed her eyes for just a moment, grounding herself in the moment, before she opened them again, ready to face whatever came next. Captain, Kale said, his voice grave, I found something. There's a signal coming from Deck 12. It's transmitting directly to the Galactic flagship. Hayes' heart skipped a beat. Deck 12. That was where the crew quarters were located, the heart of their personal lives, where families of the officers and crew were stationed. It was the last place she had expected to find something like this. "That's where Mellor said they were, right?" Hayes asked, her mind already working ahead. "The traitor and Mellor, did they make contact from there?" "It looks like it, Captain," Cale confirmed. "The transmission's been masked, but it's definitely coming from there. If we don't act fast, they'll be able to move freely. Alert security to Deck 12 immediately." "We're going in," Hayes ordered. "No one leaves until we've confirmed the traitor is neutralized." As the bridge crew activated the necessary lockdowns, Hayes' mind raced. Who else could be involved? Was it Mellor alone, or was there someone else feeding him the Zartek's commands? The thought of the traitor still being on the ship gnawed at her. The longer they waited, the more dangerous the situation became. "We're cutting off their escape routes," Hayes muttered to herself, more to reassure herself than anyone else. "No one will get out of this alive unless they answer for what they've done." She turned toward the door, ready to lead the way to Deck 12. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed as her officers rushed to follow her. There was no turning back. They had to find the traitor, and they had to do it now. As the doors slid open to the turbolift, Hayes took a steadying breath. She could feel the weight of the decision in her chest. No one would leave until this was over, and no one, not even the traitor, was exempt from the consequences. Humanity was on the brink, and there could be no room for failure. As they descended toward Deck 12, the silence in the turbolift felt suffocating. Hayes' mind churned with possibilities, but one thing was clear: there was no room for mercy. The Zartek had to be stopped, and her crew had to be whole if they were to survive. The traitor had broken their trust, but they would not break the Resolute. The lift doors opened with a sharp hiss, and the crew moved quickly down the corridor toward the target. Hayes knew that the fate of the ship, and perhaps the entire war, rested on what they found at the end of this corridor. The traitor would be unmasked, and then they would fight, as they always had. They would fight to the last, and no one, not even their own, could be allowed to stand in their way. The corridor on Deck 12 was eerily quiet. The hum of the Resolute's systems was the only sound that broke the heavy silence. Hayes' boots echoed sharply against the metal floors as she led her team, each step deliberate, every breath steady despite the chaos threatening to engulf them. Ahead, the faint flicker of light from a security terminal bathed the hallway in a sterile glow. It was the signal they were getting close. Her fingers tightened around the grip of her sidearm, her mind already calculating their next moves. The traitor could be anywhere, and they had to act swiftly. "Status?" Hayes asked, her voice low but sharp. She didn't need to say more. The weight of the situation was clear to everyone on the team. "Security access terminal up ahead, Captain," Cale replied through his comms. "I'm trying to gain control. We might be able to lock down all the doors in this section. But whoever is behind this is good. I'm seeing signs of tampering on the system." Hayes clenched her jaw. "Whoever is behind this is no longer a priority. We find the traitor first. The systems can be dealt with later." "Understood," Cale answered quickly, his voice tight. The crew continued their march toward the terminal, the tension growing with each passing second. As they neared the corner leading to the terminal, Hayes signaled them to stop, her hand raised in a silent command. "Get ready," she whispered, her voice low but commanding. She motioned for two of the security officers to move forward and clear the corner. The tension crackled in the air as the two officers silently advanced, their movements precise and practiced. The rest of the team stayed behind, weapons ready, their eyes scanning every inch of the corridor. A sharp hiss sounded from the door to the security room, and the two officers stepped inside, weapons drawn. A few moments passed in agonizing silence. Then, one of the officers spoke. "Captain, you need to see this." Hayes' stomach clenched. She motioned for the team to move, and they swiftly followed her into the room. Inside, the scene was chaos. Papers scattered across the desk, terminals flashing with malfunctioning data, and a broken monitor flickering with static. But it wasn't the mess that caught Hayes' attention. It was the figure standing in the middle of the room. It was Lieutenant Commander Malor. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, looking every bit as calm and composed as Malor had been just hours ago, was a familiar face, Commander Ushakor, the ship's chief engineer. Hayes' mind raced as she processed the scene. Kor was one of the most trusted officers aboard the Resolute. She had been with Hayes through thick and thin, often handling the most difficult problems on the ship. The thought of her being involved was almost unthinkable. "Malor." "Kor," Hayes began, her voice a sharp hiss. "What the hell is going on here?" Malor's eyes flickered toward her, but there was no warmth in them, no recognition, only coldness. He looked different. His once strong presence had crumbled under the weight of whatever had twisted him. Cora's face was a mask of resolve, a glimmer of something calculating behind her eyes. "Captain," Malor said, his voice low, almost mechanical. "It's over. We've lost." Cor stepped forward, her eyes cold as she addressed Hayes directly. "We've already won, Captain. The Jartek have already infiltrated your forces, and you didn't even see it coming. Humanity's time is up." Hayes felt a rush of anger flood her chest. "You don't know what you're talking about, Kor. You were supposed to be one of us. What did they promise you? What did the Jartek give you?" Kor's lips curled into a faint smile. "It's not about what they gave me, Captain. It's about what you refused to see. The Resolute was always a symbol of humanity's fight against the odds. But in the end, we were nothing but a tool, your tool. And now, we serve a greater purpose." "You've been compromised," Hayes snapped, stepping forward, her anger rising. "You were supposed to be loyal. You're loyal, Kor. What have they done to you?" Malor's voice cut through her words. "It's too late, Captain. The signal has already been sent. The Jartek fleet will converge on our position within the next few hours. You've been so focused on the external war that you forgot about the internal one. It was never just about defeating the Jartek. It was about what would happen after we lost." Kor's eyes gleamed with a hint of satisfaction as she spoke. "You've been blinded by your need to hold on to this illusion of humanity's strength, but it's already crumbling. The Jartek were just the beginning." Hayes stood frozen, the weight of their words sinking in. The treachery was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just that they had betrayed her. It was that they had been right. They had seen the cracks before anyone else. They had seen the flaw in their mission, the fundamental truth that the war was unwinnable. A quiet anger bubbled inside Hayes, threatening to erupt. She would not let them have the final word. Not here. Not now. "You think you've already won?" Hayes asked, her voice low, but brimming with cold fury. "You've underestimated humanity's will to survive, and you've underestimated me." Before Malor or Kor could respond, she raised her sidearm, her fingers tightening around the grip. "We'll see who wins in the end." The room seemed to hold its breath as the battle lines were drawn. Malor and Kor were no longer just traitors. They were threats to the survival of everything humanity had fought for. And Captain Hayes wasn't about to let them destroy it all. The fight was far from over. The air in the security room seemed to grow thicker with every passing second. Hayes could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, her grip on the sidearm steady despite the whirlwind of emotions raging within her. Her crew, her family, was now divided, and everything she had fought for was teetering on the edge of collapse. Malor, standing with that cold, unfeeling expression, was no longer the man she had trusted. And Cor, the woman who had helped rebuild the Resolute time and time again, was now the enemy. "You've made a grave mistake," Hayes said, her voice low, but filled with an unshakable certainty. "You both have." Malor's lips twitched into a hollow smile. "You think you can stop us? After everything? The signal's already been sent. The Zartek fleet is on its way. Your precious Resolute is nothing more than a pawn in a game you couldn't even see." Hayes felt a surge of fury, but she held it in check. Focus. Stay calm. Her mind raced through their options. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. "We'll stop them," she said, her voice unwavering. "You've underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to fight back. Even with your betrayal, you won't win. You'll never have control." Cor chuckled darkly, stepping closer. "You're so naive, Captain. The Zartek gave us purpose. We don't serve as pawns anymore. We've ascended. All we had to do was make you see the truth." Her eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating glint. "You see, you're not the last hope of humanity. The Zartek are. They'll bring the universe under order, and you'll be nothing but a memory." Hayes' gaze hardened, her jaw clenched. "You're wrong." Suddenly, an explosion rocked the ship, the tremors of the blast shaking the walls. The lights flickered, then died, plunging them into darkness. A moment later, the emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a red hue. The floor seemed to pulse with a dangerous energy, and the hum of the ship's engines had taken on a far more ominous tone. "We're under attack." Kell's voice came through the comms, panic evident even in his usually calm tone. "The Zartek fleet is here." Hayes cursed under her breath. Malor had been right. The signal had gone through, but there was no time to dwell on it now. The fight was on their doorstep, and the fate of the Resolute and humanity hung in the balance. "Get to the bridge," Hayes shouted. Everyone move. "Cor, Malor, you're not getting away with this." Malor's expression remained unchanged as he stepped back toward a hidden control panel. "It's already too late, Captain. You should have accepted the truth when you had the chance." Hayes was done with words. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and a single shot rang out. The bullet struck Malor square in the chest, knocking him back with a sickening thud. His body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Cor's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she moved swiftly, drawing a weapon from under her coat. Before Hayes could react, Cor fired, but the shot missed by mere inches, slamming into a console behind her. "You are the one who's underestimating," Hayes growled, her own weapon aimed squarely at Cor. "You've lost, Cor. It's over." But Cor wasn't finished. With a wild scream, she lunged forward, tackling Hayes to the ground. The two women rolled across the floor, each trying to gain control of the other's weapon. Cor was stronger than Hayes had expected, her desperation fueling her every move. The gun slipped from Hayes' grasp as Cor pinned her down, her hands tightening around her throat. "I told you," Cor spat, her breath hot and heavy. "The Zartek will bring the end. You were never strong enough to lead us to victory. We needed more. More than you could ever give us." Hayes' vision blurred, but she fought back with everything she had. She kicked out, knocking Cor off balance. The two women grappled on the cold, metal floor, each trying to secure the advantage. With a final, desperate movement, Hayes reached up, grabbing a metal rod from the debris of the destroyed console. She swung it with all her strength, catching Cor across the face. The blow sent Cor sprawling back, her weapon skittering across the floor. Hayes didn't hesitate. She grabbed the weapon, her heart pounding in her chest, and aimed it directly at Cor's head. The traitor's eyes locked with hers, a mixture of fury and disbelief in them. But Hayes had seen enough. She couldn't afford mercy now, not after everything that had happened. "I gave you a chance," Hayes said, her voice hoarse but steady. "But you've made your choice." With a single swift motion, she pulled the trigger. Aura's body slumped, lifeless, her expression frozen in the moment of her final defeat. Hayes stood, her breath ragged, her body aching from the confrontation. She turned toward the door, her team quickly flooding into the room. They had to act fast. The Zartec were here, and they wouldn't wait for anyone to recover. "Marlowe, Kell," she barked. "We need to get to the bridge. Now." Without another word, they rushed out, Hayes leading them with purpose. Her mind raced as she ran, piecing together the fractured remnants of their plan. They still had a chance, but only if they acted quickly. The Resolute was battered, the Zartec fleet closing in. But Hayes wasn't going to give up. Not while there was breath in her lungs. Not while humanity still had a fighting chance. The fight had only just begun. The corridors of the Resolute had transformed into a battleground. Hayes' boots pounded against the metal floors, the urgent clatter of her team's footsteps echoing behind her. The dim-red emergency lighting flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across their path. The Zartec fleet was closing in, and the ship was already taking fire. The hum of the engines had turned to a guttural growl, the hull groaning under the strain. "Captain, we're losing power to the forward shields." Kell's voice came through her comms, panicked but still sharp. "If we don't get them back online, the Zartec will tear us apart before we even make it to the bridge." "I know," Hayes replied, her voice tight with focus. "But we need to hold them off long enough to launch a counterattack. We can't let them take us." They rounded the final corner, and the bridge doors slid open, revealing the chaos within. The crew was in motion, managing tactical systems, rerouting power, and trying to keep the Resolute functional despite the onslaught from the Zartec. A large display showed their attackers. A massive Zartec warship flanked by smaller deadly craft. They were fast, brutal, and relentless. "Report." Hayes barked as she stormed onto the bridge. "Shields are down to 30%, Captain." Commander Orin, the tactical officer, reported quickly, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We're sitting ducks unless we can get them back online." "How long?" Hayes demanded. "Not long enough to evade them, Captain," Orin replied. "Our best chance is to fight back with what we have." A loud thrum reverberated through the ship as another round of Zartec fire hit the hull. Sparks flew from the nearby consoles, and the lights flickered again, threatening to plunge them back into darkness. "Then let's fight," Hayes said, her voice resolute. "Deploy all remaining fighters and prepare the main cannon. If we're going down swinging." Her crew scrambled into action, each officer responding with swift, practiced precision. The Resolute had taken a beating, but Hayes knew it still had teeth, and she was going to make sure they get back. The countdown began as the main cannon powered up, its core flickering to life with a hum that vibrated through the deck. On the view screen, the Zartec warship loomed larger, a massive silhouette in the black void of space. Hayes' heart raced. This was it. There would be no second chance. "Fighters ready," Orin called out. "Launch them," Hayes ordered. A series of explosions rocked the Resolute as the hangar doors opened, releasing their remaining fleet of fighter ships. The small craft shot out into space, weaving through the debris and incoming fire to engage the Jartek forces head-on. The Resolute herself began to turn, maneuvering as best she could to line up her remaining weapons. Main cannon at 85% power, the weapons officer called, the strain evident in his voice. We'll be ready in 30 seconds. A streak of green energy shot past the Resolute, narrowly missing her hull. The Jartek were relentless, launching salvo after salvo, each one getting closer to their target. 20 seconds. The officer shouted. "Come on, come on," Hayes muttered under her breath, her eyes never leaving the enemy ship. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. There would be no retreat now, no escape. The only option was to fight with everything they had. The bridge trembled once more as another hit struck, but Hayes didn't flinch. She was done with hesitation. 15 seconds. Orin called out. "They're preparing to fire again." "We've got to stop them," Hayes snapped. "Get me a clear shot." The seconds dragged, feeling like hours, and then finally, "Main cannon ready." The weapons officer cried out. "Target the Jartek flagship," Hayes shouted. "Take that ship down." Orin worked furiously at his console, locking in the targeting coordinates. A single shot. This would be their one shot to turn the tide. Firing. The weapons officer yelled. The Resolute's main cannon roared to life with a brilliant, blinding beam of concentrated energy. It cut through space, a streak of raw power aimed directly at the heart of the Jartek warship. For a split second, everything held its breath. Then the Jartek flagship erupted in a violent explosion, its shields failing in the face of the concentrated fire. The explosion rippled out into space, sending debris scattering in all directions. The shockwave rocked the Resolute, but Hayes barely felt it. Her eyes were locked on the view screen, watching the cloud of destruction expand. "Direct hit," Orin said, his voice filled with awe. "Flagship neutralized, Captain." But the battle wasn't over. As the Jartek flagship burned in the distance, the remaining smaller craft turned to face the Resolute, launching another wave of fire. "We've got multiple Jartek ships closing in," Cale shouted. "They're not retreating." Hayes didn't hesitate. The Resolute was battered, her shields were nearly gone, and there was no guarantee they would survive another assault. But they had just struck a devastating blow. The Jartek had lost their command ship, and that would send shockwaves through their ranks. "Set course for the Jartek reinforcements," Hayes ordered, her voice hard. "All remaining fighters, cover the ship. We're not done yet." A fierce grin spread across Hayes' face. She knew that this wasn't the final battle, but it could be the beginning of the end for the Jartek. They had taken their best shot, but humanity wasn't finished yet. "We've got this," she muttered to herself, her gaze fierce. "We're not giving up." With the Resolute still intact, and the last remnants of her crew still standing, Hayes made the call. The fight for humanity's future had reached its climax, but it was far from over, and she would lead them until the very end.